Okay, so this one's obviously whopper. It's an absolute doozy. It's too big to refuse, so I'm going to have a crack at it and see what you guys can garner out of it. Anyone who's actually interested in some perspectives you may not have considered. If you're someone who's, a Trump white hat Q trilogy follower, I honestly suggest you just tune out right now, because the likelihood of you getting any value out of this is minimal, because when you're guarded to attach to your beliefs, this just ends up being propaganda, conspiracy, whatever your mind turns it into. So there's going to be no value for you here. What I do want to say is that I too, once upon a time, fell for these tricks. So, you're hearing it from someone who was seduced by these things, because the reason why, if I really sink down into it, was from somewhere really beautiful and precious that I still celebrate, and that is the wanting to have faith in my fellow human beings as actually caring for life, that they would want to care for others' lives as much as they do for their own. Essentially that's a very beautiful thing. Sadly, that's being manipulated to control the mass of people. And so that's what we're going to look into today. So I'm going to start with Larkin Rose. This comes from the video that he made recently. I was hoping he would make one, so he did. So thank you, Larkin, for doing this. You made my life real easy. The video he made is Slave Smith 101. So I'm just going to break it up into pieces instead of giving the whole 30 minutes of it. And then we'll take it from there. So here we go with Larkin with the first part.
There's a reason that pretty much the most important line in Jones Plantation, if you ask me, is if you want to wield real power, you must be willing to do what most consider unthinkable. And the power behind that is, if most people can't imagine doing something that heinous themselves, they also can't imagine other people. The people on TV who say how much they care about us, they can't imagine those people being at least complicit, if not directly involved, in heinous atrocities.
All right, so hopefully you've paid attention to that, because that's the centerpiece of all kinds of control structures. That if you want to control people, you need to be able to do that, and willing to do that which they would never conceive. And if they would never conceive it, they'll never believe it. That's really critical. This is all about getting into the mind of the slave, the one you're choosing to enslave. Now, before I continue, I need to preface this with the understanding of what grooming is, right? So most people, not most, but enough people that I hear in this so-called freedom movement, I'm just calling it a so-called one because there is no movement and there's no freedom. You'll hear them say things about child pedophilia and grooming, right? And how the pedophile will groom the parents, first, before he actually grooms the child. I'm using the male example because that's the most common one. So using that mentality, that understanding, it's always the same thing, whether it's towards, grooming children and getting children the way you want to take advantage of them, or whether it's to, grooming you as the adult, so you can be taken advantage of, right? So now I'm going to go through the list of things that I remember hearing about this whole Trump Q, white hat, whatever you want to call it, fantasy, that I remember finding so seductive, right? So these are the things that I remember hearing, and this is how I felt for the grooming too, right? And the difference was that I made use of that grooming, and started putting my moral faculties into that, and started questioning it through those moral faculties, right? And that requires you to detach from those emotions that you have, and it's very powerful emotions, that are holding you into that space of really wanting something to be true. So I've just made a list of it. Some of the things that were wonderful stories. Are really triggering my imagination, and I'm wondering if that's the same for most people. So there was the whole thing that Charlie Ward was huge about, making sure that there was the belief that Trump is his 5D chess player. And then there was his wife's a Pleiadian, part of the Galactic Federation. You would have heard all this kind of stuff. There's aliens amongst us. They're like our caretakers, etc. Then you have Trump's speech at the UN. When he's talking about national sovereignty. Standing up against the bad guys, so to speak. you've got all those Q drops and those coded messages. So what does that actually do? That gets you involved in the whole thing, right? So it's drawing your attention into something that's fake. But because you've got to work so hard to decode it, right? There's like this sense of accomplishment when you do, and that's the attachment, right? That's how they get you to attach, is by using those needs you have for accomplishing something difficult, right? And overcoming an obstacle. It's very, very easily done once you understand how human psychology works. You obviously got the white hat saviors, so we all have this thing about being saved by someone, being rescued. Most of us have that thing where we'd like there to be someone else who cares enough about us to step in, you know what I mean, and help out. So that works on that foundation. Then you've got the Fall of the Cabal series, right? That a lot of people enthralled, right? And in there you learnt about that dance, that sword dance that Trump did in Saudi Arabia. You would have seen that thing about, him walking in front of Queen Elizabeth II. Then, having those pictures with the Pope when he met the Pope, and the Pope had all his misery faces, all that kind of stuff, and the stories that were wrapped around that, right? I mean, there's no way that could have been put on, is there? That was totally legit, because you were there witnessing it, weren't you? Then there was those stories about the gold being flown out of the Vatican, how many aeroplanes worth, the secret military tribunals, the expansion of Guantanamo Bay to house all these so-called bad guys that are waiting trial in these tribunals. So you've got that lust for vengeance, it's really feeding that. So these are all these real primitive things that are being activated. What about the caging of the White House, when the military turned their backs on Biden? They started building that story out as well. Then you had, Biden's plane not being the real Air Force One, Hunter Biden's laptop, and in amongst all that, you've got the QFS, the Sarah Jessara story being dropped in there, and the list just goes on, right? So they're just some of the key ones I recall, having some kind of allure and appeal that, some part of me really wanted to be true, because I wanted to believe there's other people that care about life just as much as I do. They want to take down this kind of, real heinous, depraved slavery system. So I'm prefacing that as the grooming, as to why there would be an attachment to seeing Trump, and investing in him as your leader and savior, right? And if you can sort of acknowledge that, then there's a chance there's some growth here for you in your spiritual development. And when I say spiritual, I mean your capacity to free yourself from the mind slavery tricks that most people buy into. So let's go listen to Lark and Rose speak about it some more.
One of the things is motive, means motive and opportunity. Motive. Does somebody get something out of what just happened? Let's think about them. What would he gain? What would they gain? What would he gain? If you're already incapable of doing that because something was just so horrible, like 2 buildings falling down, 3,000 people dying, well, now I can't even think about that. I can't even think who benefited from that. Then they're going to do it more. Because that's how slavesmiths think. We're going to do something so evil that you're not even going to be able to consider the possibility that we did it. You're going to say, scary Arabs on the other side of the world. Or some crazy people. Whatever. Anything other than the people who actually benefited from it, planning it and carrying it out. Because it can't be that. And if you can't comprehend that possibility, you're just a crappy investigator. If you don't start with who had something to gain, if you can't start there and say, well, they would gain, and they might gain, and they could have a propaganda advantage from this, and you just start with, who am I too scared to consider as somebody who might do this? All right, you're never going to know the truth. If you're going to know the truth, first you have to want to know the truth. And if you want to know the truth, then you start objectively looking at it and go, okay, who would benefit from this happening? Let's consider which one of those is likely, which one of those had the means, motive, opportunity. Golly gee, Secret Service sitting there with their rifles, looking in the direction of the shooter, through a rifle scope, like this, and then golly, the guy takes a shot, and then they shoot him. Well, there's an opportunity for you. If you can say, hey, that guy over there, wait until he fires a couple times. Now, I don't know if that's what happened, but I'm able to consider that. How many people aren't able to consider that because they see the conclusion and the conclusion is too scary for them, and they rule out possibilities not based on evidence or logic or motivation, but just based on, I don't want to have to think about that. The slave smiths are counting on you to be too scared to think about some of the evil shit they would do. And they will keep doing it if it keeps working. And if people keep falling for it, it will keep working, and so it will keep happening.
So that's critical information there, guys. I'm hoping that's starting to register something that people, the old saying that if it's not broken, don't fix it. So if you're going to feed into, the old traps, they're going to keep getting sprung on you. And that's that old saying, right? Those who don't remember, the sins of the past, or like from their mistakes, learn from their mistakes, pretty much means the same thing. So the mistake is not the issue, it's whether you've learned from it, right? That's where the real power is. Well, you're doomed to repeat them, and here we are, we're in that cycle. Humanity is doomed to repeat it. So I'm hoping there's some kind of understanding as to why I'm picking out these pieces of videos or aspects of Larkin's video to start building an understanding and awareness of why it's really critical to understand this. So now we're going to go into the next one.
Which, as much as I don't give a crap about politicians, knocking them off doesn't help either, because they are never the problem in and of themselves. Even if they're evil, warmongering psychos who deserve it, it still doesn't fix the problem to shoot them, because, like I was just talking about, ideas are bulletproof, including shitty ideas. And as long as people believe in authoritarianism, all the way knocking off one ruling class is just going to result in another ruling class being put up, as long as the people believe in the legitimacy of political authority and the law, as in scribbles of political parasites. So it's not a solution, but I want people to get more and more aware of how the games work, so when they see something, their first thought is, well, what are some possible things that can make this sort of thing happen?
So that's what we're really starting to look at here. We're zooming out. Instead of getting caught in the weeds of the specific details, which is what you'll see the bulk of the focus will be now, the argument will be on the factual correctness of the specifics of this event versus the actual potential, or not potential, but the actual intention of how confusion and chaos serves a ruling class that operate from like rituals and death rituals, right? The blood sacrifice mentality, this illusion of power, that they believe this is how power actually works. Where really it's just the manipulation of force, of the hidden forces that exist in reality, and how to manipulate them. But that's not actual power. I'm not going to get into the discussion of what power is in this one. Just wanted to preface this with the Star Wars trilogies, or not even trilogies, like I don't know how many movies they've made in that sequence now. And I want to bring to attention one specific one. I mean, if you watch them all, they're all it's the same story, and it's basically the story of a death cult, that really gets off on their blood sacrifice rituals of their own kind, by the way, their own people. That's all part of it. It's to chew them up as well. So no one's off the table. Everyone gets their turn eventually, right? That's just how sick and bent this is. There was one, I can't remember which one it was, but Ben Mendelsohn is in it, the Australian actor, where he was the creator of the Death Ray from the Death Star, the one that blows up planets. And he ends up getting killed by the very thing he invented, right? So right there, they're symbolically showing you over and over again how they operate. They must show you. That's their religion. Right? So if you take that understanding, you will understand, you really understand it if you want to, right? That this is all part of that same psychopathy. They're just different expressions, but it's the same central belief structure. It's the same sick superstition, right? And it's being acted out and repeated. And the only way it keeps going is because people keep giving their energy to it. So everyone who shows up to any rally or votes or has any belief in any sort of criminal government structure and believes that that's some legitimate way of living, you are feeding that death cult ritual. Whether you like it or not doesn't change the facts. That's what it is. So until you're actually mature enough and you grow up internally and spiritually to face up to the fact that you can be fooled, right? But then give yourself some kind of understanding as to what was the beauty behind how you were fooled. Maybe you have a chance of actually growing up and moving past your the wounds of what it's like to actually accept that you can be fooled, right? So if you're at a space of doing that, then there's some value in this kind of content for you. So let's see what else Larkin's got to say.
The moment I heard the story yesterday, I thought, okay, from the mind of slavesmiths, who don't give a crap about anybody, including their own puppets, what are some possible motivations for something like this to have happened? Now, one of the things that very deliberately was included in Jones Plantation, the novel and the movie, is that Mr. Smith, the slavesmith, he's in charge of everything. He owns everything. He controls everything, including the politicians, including Jones and Johnson. He is above them in intellect and manipulation and the leverage he gets on them. Again, the novel gets into that a little bit more than would fit in a movie, but it's obviously in both. So even though it's technically Mr. Jones's plantation, very quickly everybody knows that Mr. Smith is the one in charge, and that's the reality. So these political puppets, even though they pretend Trump is the leader of no, Trump is the puppet under a bunch of people, most of whose names you don't know, and a bunch of financial interests whose ass he kisses exactly the same as Biden did, and Bush, and Obama, and the other Bush, and Clinton. Go back as far as you want. They all kiss the ass of the financial interests, the warmongers, the banking cartels, and all that stuff. He's an ass kisser. He doesn't really have any power of his own, which is one thing that Trumpites just don't comprehend. When you understand the game going on and you see something like that happen, like if you're watching Jones Plantation and you're getting near the end and something else horrible happens, hopefully by then your brain is like, is that what it looked like, or is something devious going on? People who understand history and understand how these psychopaths function should hear a story like that and immediately go, huh.
So that's obviously some more critical information there, guys. It all comes down to the same principle, right? And that's the principle. If you choose to seek power over another being, it requires extreme vigilance all the time and constantly coming up with a way to seal off all the exits so the victim of your power struggle that you've created can never get out, right? And these are just the machinations of that. So basically we're looking at the Game of Thrones in action, right? That series, right? It was laying it all out for you. Here it is in real life, right? As I say, art imitating life, etc. And once you understand it at its core principles, it becomes really easy to predict. So the purpose of this is, learning how to predict how things are going to go. If you care to want to move past, where your unrecognized biases lie, and that requires some courage to face up to the fact that you're imperfect, and that's okay, and it's part of your growth and development cycle, right? So if that's what you're really here for, this might have some value for you. So we're going to listen a little bit more to get some more detail from Larkin.
Now, obviously the picture of Trump there with blood and Secret Service trying to hold him down, but no, I'm brave and fighting the blah, blah, blah. Well, there's an awesome political propaganda point. So if you fake it, you have actually good snipers, you kill a couple spectators because you don't give a shit about them if you're slavesmith. And then you fake it and make it look like he got hit in the ear or whatever. And by the way, I'm not at all saying this happened. I'm saying before I know any of the facts, I'm well aware of, okay, so that side of the propaganda machine can totally benefit from it. And by the way, it is totally benefiting from it right stinking now, regardless of what the actual cause was. We can make him look like this brave hero who's standing up for America. He doesn't give a crap about you any more than he did 2 days ago, which was absolutely zero. He does not give a crap what happens to you. Trump doesn't care about you or America or freedom. He cares about Trump and Trump and Trump and Trump and also Trump. So that side can benefit from the propaganda of make him look like a martyr, not quite all the way a martyr, because you have to be dead to actually be a martyr, but in the direction of a martyr to look what he's standing up against and look what our enemies are doing. So that's one obvious reason to do a stunt like that, a motivation to do a stunt like that. Again, I'm not saying which one I think it was. I don't even know which one it was. I haven't bothered to look into it. Probably never will, because I don't give a shit. But I do give a shit whether people can comprehend how these things function.
So that's the critical thing, as why I left it there, is to comprehend how these behaviours manifest. And taking personal responsibility for your individual part in helping that along, being part of it. So Larkin doesn't do information on that part, Mark Passio does. That's why we're going to go into him explaining where your real power is and why that knowledge has been concealed from you so you don't activate it. Because if you don't have this knowledge, you're going to, by default, be going to some kind of immoral structures that are going to keep you enslaved. So let's listen to Mark give that detail.
Okay.
Yes,
so,
absolutely. I would agree with every one of those things as far as objective morality is concerned. Natural law is a set of laws that are universal, non-man-made, inherent to nature. They are immutable. They can never be changed. They are eternal. They exist in all times and places. And these are the laws that actually govern whether an entire species is going to create a situation in which they are either free or enslaved and then have to live in that reality. These are the real laws of manifestation, the real laws of attraction, not the fake New Age laws of attraction about feeling a certain way and then you get the physical things or situations you want in the small aspect of your life and your egoic desires. That's not what I'm talking about here as the laws of attraction. The real laws of attraction is as an entire society behaves morally according to the laws of objective morality, that society becomes free. And as a society ignores those laws that are built into the fabric of nature and just does not care about what objective morals are and continue to behave in an immoral capacity, they go deeper and deeper into bondage as an entire species. And that's what's happening. That is what is happening in our world because more people today are moral relativists than are not. I've done social experiments and I talk about them in the presentation that I do for Acapulco 2021. I've done social experiments in many different places where we ask the question whether people believe that morals are dependent on people's perceptions and feelings or whether they are objective and built into the fabric of nature. And overwhelmingly, we get the same results. 2 out of 3 people are moral relativists. And that's why society can never be free until that changes. A society based in moral relativism can never be a free society. It is an impossibility according to the laws of the universe. It cannot occur. And this is what many people, even in the anarchist community, certainly in the public at large, but even in the anarchist community, most people are still ignorant to these laws and how they function. And until they learn them and learn them well and understand that these are the governing dynamics that drive either freedom or enslavement, nothing is going to change. Not for the better, anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. It kept freezing. It wasn't like that when I recorded it, so can't really give you an explanation on that one. But basically, if you show up believing that there is some kind of solution through politics of any version, you're basically contributing to more slavery. That's essentially what this is about. While you give any kind of credence to anyone else who claims to have power over you and that can claim to fix your problems by organising, people to use force and violence to get what you believe you want, right? You are contributing to the decline of freedom and the advance of depravity and misery. That's essentially what this is about. And each individual needs to care enough to start pulling themselves out of that ideology, that mind prison, to start seeing reality, how it functions. And the only way you can do that is if you actually start investigating the things that really can be discovered in nature and the laws of nature, and start using your intuition and start trusting it. It's amazing how fast and accelerated your growth will be just from that simple thing, just trusting it instead of talking yourself out of it. How many people say, I wish I listened to my gut instinct, right? Just it's that simple, right? But that requires you to actually start seeing that some of your own behaviours have been out of alignment with your true self as well. And then, starting to accept that is a possibility, and start working with that, And so this is the bits where, my guess is that far too many people struggle. So what do? They just shut it off. They don't want to look at it, and then they just go back to what they always experienced and always known, and somehow put some faith into it because they lack the courage to face themselves. And that's what we're really working with here. And you extrapolate that out. In the aggregate, you have what Mark's just explained. So we're going to go get some more detail on what Mark just touched on.
When you say these laws of morality exist in nature, can you send me a picture of them? Like, what proof do you have? Like, where's the evidence of the moral laws actually existing in nature?
Great question. And I'd like to make an addendum to the moral relativism, exploration that we were going down in a moment. But that's a great question. These are unseen laws. They're not something that you're going to. It's not like throwing a ball up in the air and it has a trajectory depending on how hard you threw it, and you can measure that, and then it comes back down to the earth, and you could observe gravity, right? And you can measure that. It's a physical dynamic. That's in physics, physical dynamics, okay? These laws are not based in physical dynamics. They are based in mental dynamics. They are laws that come out of mental energy that we put forth into the universe, and the universe actually acts as a mechanism similar to a mirror that reflects those mental dynamics back to us, purposes of our learning and growth. The proof, quote unquote, okay, and it does constitute a form of proof, is the measurement of how free any given society is based on their historical behaviors, based on a dynamic over a large swath of time. See, that's what makes it difficult to gauge. Real karma and karmic law does not work as it does in the cartoons, unfortunately. Somebody doesn't do a bad thing to somebody, say steal their money, and then they walk outside, and as soon as they walk out onto the street, a piano falls onto their head like it does in the cartoons. That's not how karma works, unfortunately. The laws of morality work in such a way that they are stretched out over periods of time, so that as an entire species engages in immoral behavior and the condoning of immoral behavior, such as the slavery of government, over time, those people and their progeny become more and more controlled and enslaved. So it's a difficult thing to measure, to see. This is why it is an occult law. It is an occulted law. That means hidden from our eyesight. It is hidden from view. We have to dig deeper than just the physical measuring implementation that the physical sciences have brought down to us, and we have to go into what I would consider the occult sciences. The occult sciences are sciences of the mind. They are sciences of the psyche, and ultimately they are the sciences of spirit. This constitutes a science of spirituality and a science of morality, really. And it can be measured by the observable and repeatable effects that we experience in our world. That is how it can actually be measured, as can many other things can be measured by their effects, which may not quite be able to be seen. We can't see, radioactive particles, okay, but we can measure the effects. If it's exposed to people, they can get radiation sickness. It's very similar to something like that, where it's not very readily seen. But if we measure the effects over long periods of time, we can understand the trend.
Hopefully that's giving you guys something to stew on, and if you're struggling to understand, I highly encourage you to look Mark Passio up. You can replay what he just said, take notes. There's many different ways you can assimilate this knowledge. So now we're going to go into the next element, which Mark and Larkin and a bunch of people who define themselves as anarchists miss, and that is the actual safe container. Because nature has its constitution, and that is the boundary conditions of life. That's another definition of constitution. And so we ourselves can create our own version of that reflects those same boundary conditions, so we can actually live peacefully and cohesively. And if we're not operating out of that uniform understanding of what those conditions are, then we're going to have chaos, right? So now we're going to go into the parts that Mark and Larkin both. Mark and Larkin, that sounds like it's got a ring to it. They both have missed, and give some more definitions to help put some more puzzle pieces together.
For it to function in alignment with natural law and in alignment with natural justice, the Constitution has to be leaving the people in a natural state, whilst it binds government only into upholding and supporting the already existing natural rights of the people. That's really important. So that was the second thing. And the third thing I wanted to address was once you actually think through completely and think of all the implications of what this means in reality, what it means is that the people are living an anarchist-like lifestyle, essentially. Now, for that reason, so what we're really meaning by that is an individualist ideology and almost full-blown anarchy, but it's not actually. In fact, it's short of full-blown anarchy. So what would that be? Full-blown anarchy would be, yes, self-mastery, but because we are imperfect as human beings, it means that full-blown anarchy is dangerous because you would be effectively taking the law into your own hands. Yeah, you can't do that, right? So you need an anarchist-like lifestyle, but what the limits are essentially that you submit to the consciences of the people in your community. So when something goes wrong, and it seems as though that there is concern in your community about whether you've committed a crime, it's at that point that you have to submit to the consciences of the people around you, as you would do naturally in any human relationship. If you're living in a village in, in some part of the world in the middle of the Amazon jungle or something like that, it's the same principles apply. You don't live in that community, in that community, and then do something that would hurt other people in that village and then think you're going to get away with it. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so naturally we will submit to the consciences of the people around us, and it's doing that causes us not to be living in a full-blown anarchic system. It's anarchy with limits. It's anarchy with a safe container. And that's really what democracy is. That's why it's gold, right? Because it's anarchist-like, but with the safety mechanism in place because of our imperfections as human beings. Really important, that. So that was the third thing. And then, just the last thing to say on that, which leads me into the fourth point, which is that anarchists really need to jump on board and understand the value of this, because they have a tendency to think that whenever anybody starts talking about the Constitution, they immediately think, oh, you're talking about government, you're talking about the state. Well, no, because actually understand the important point that under this constitutional mechanism, we don't really have a state in the true sense, because you don't have a government with any kind of teeth or power. Okay, when it's the people doing their own governing and the government is simply carrying out the wishes of the people, then you kind of don't really have a state in a sense, right? And that means that anarchists should be looking at this and taking it seriously. And I'm getting a bit frustrated because I like anarchists a lot. I have a lot of time because I kind of am one, really. Anarchists like, people like Mark Passio and Larkin Rose, I have the greatest respect for these people. I've learnt a lot from them. But actually, this is a blind spot for them. They still haven't spotted this. And I think that anarchists would do well to take a hard look at this and realise that this ultimately is really what they're after. All along, this has been the thing that's hiding, in the middle of all these different things that people, these different groups that people sit in. It's this little thing in the middle called our Constitution, which actually is going, I think I've done this. I've already achieved this for you, by the way. And that's the trick, I think. Somewhere along the way is we've got people of the establishment over here. They don't like what I'm saying about the Constitution. They don't like the authentic version of the Constitution because it frightens them, because they're in a collectivist mindset, so they don't like the idea of the people governing themselves. That's scary, right? And I can understand that, because what that potentially means is that we've got risk and we've got danger to get back to where we should be. It's all about taking responsibility, and I understand. But we got the freedom movement as well that don't like it because they seem to think that, you know, it's all about, you know, administrative fraud and things like that. Well, no, it's not really. It's actually about this. It's about a contortion in the ideology of how law is affected by a kind of distorted ideology in the establishment, essentially. So that's what it's really about, and they don't like it because it sounds old-fashioned and, you know, kind of government type thing, and it's all establishment and the political class and that sort of thing. But they don't realise that the Constitution actually has the seeds of that brilliance within it. So they don't like it either, and as I've said, anarchists don't like it either. So I'm increasingly finding that this constitutional law material is kind of sitting somewhere in the centre, in a sort of space that people are just looking over. They're not spotting it at all. And I think if people really sat up and listened and really read into this, they would realise this is what we're all after. It always has been, in fact.
So there you have it, guys. Hopefully that starts to drop a few pennies for you. What's really at the centre of this is there's a structure in place by how we can cohesively cooperate with one another and be accountable to the neutrality of conscience. That's essentially what that is. So the genuine constitution he speaks of are the articles of common law that exist within the 1215 Magna Carta. That's what he's actually speaking about. To my mind, as my knowledge, there is no other actual legitimate constitution that exists outside of those common law articles, because a constitution is not an elaborate list of rules and amendments and bills, etc. That's not a constitution. It's just a set of principles that agree with the principles that exist in nature. That's it. That's all it is. It's nothing else. It's really basic. So it doesn't require this big, thick book. So if you still believe in the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution as having some kind of merit, in reality, you've missed the understanding of what the true nature of a constitution is. So I highly recommend really looking at how you came to those attachments. You know, what were the biases and prejudices that it was feeding? You know, the sense of power you got when you started attaching to that, because that's where you're getting sucked in, right? Is if you really want to disempower the disempowered, is you give them something to attach to that's false, but gives them that immediate experience of feeling empowered. That's how it's done, right? That's what these so-called leaders do. They play on that entire understanding of the human psyche and its need to feel empowered, and how to do that in a way that gives them the experience of it, but without the actual bones and the teeth and the skeleton, all of it that come with it. It's an empty way to sell you the ideal of power, but you don't actually have any. And so if you're actually someone who really wants to step into your true power, it means understanding the structure that was set up correctly and then working your way back from it. Because there's an old saying that I remember hearing that I really enjoy rolling out, and that is, the people are damaged in relationship, therefore they can only be healed through relationship. So we all have a relationship with these structures, but these structures have been inverted to harm us. So it's not the structure itself that's the issue, it's the consciousness that's running it. And if each individual has the courage and will to start learning about the correct nature of the structure, then they can use that structure as a source of their own healing. There's your closure, guys. That's what's been missing. So if that's making sense to you and it resonates with you, then I highly recommend watching on, and I'm going to point to where you can find out more information as to how you can start healing yourself through using the correct structure. And not only healing yourself, but your friends, family, neighbours, be part of that. Right? Okay, so if you're looking to find some kind of guidance about moral principle, and that there is actually a structure in place that was built on moral principle, where the system of governance, which just means system of public servants and administration of how services will be delivered to the people equitably in order to advance the quality of all lives equally. This site has got plenty on it. I'm just going to quickly, I'm not going to go too much into it because I've done plenty of other videos about that, but here we go. It's already standing on principle. You can see that unifying our community. It talks about the 1901 Australia Crime Punishment Manifesto, which is the 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution, so it talks about why that's a fraud and how that's just more enslavement. And then you've got participate in our police letter campaign. If you want to do that, you can click on that, take you right there, subscribe to the mailing list. As you go back up here, you can see all the different places you can look into. And so anyway, that's for you to discover in your own time, but just giving you a resource. It's magnacarta1215.com. There you go.